Well, hello everybody. Um, I thought I would do a short live. I seen a few things here lately. Um, just this morning, I was over on a video that just happened to pop up in my feed, so I went to go look at it, and uh, I noticed that there were some people in this video, well, like there usually are on this channel. I don't even know why I'm even subscribed to it, but there's people on this specific channel that believe in fantasy fairy tales and myths about our country that just aren't true. They're not true. Um, this channel is a military related channel, I guess you could say. I mean, it's not like hardcore factual. I mean, they'll say some facts, but then they'll interlace it with like a whole bunch of BS. And the video today that I'm talking about was this one that popped up about um, aircraft production. Aircraft production. Our aircraft production here in America. So they're trying to say that we can continually produce aircraft at a rate like we once did in World War II, and I'm like, no, 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 hell no, we can't. No, because though we can produce about 80 fighters or tactical ground attack aircraft, that category, smaller jets, we can produce about 80 a year, which is true. He starts off telling the truth, but then he strays into this domain, which is total fantasy. It's a myth, right? So he starts to say that, despite the fact that we get a lot of foreign components for our aircraft, we would hammer those things out, and with our tiny, puny, shrunk level of industry, be able to increase aircraft production just like that, willy-nilly, right? So, though we don't have these massive factories that can do this anymore, nor do we have the aircraft which require massively more advanced components than once had in World War II or early Cold War, because aircraft were simpler designs back then, right? They were much simpler designs back then. You didn't have all these high-tech components that, electronic and just the radar suites, all of these high-tech components, you didn't have that back then. You just didn't have it, you know. And the early radars were not that complicated. They really weren't that complicated. So you had a situation whereby you could at one time produce a lot of aircraft because America was, actually industrialized back in those times. We're talking coming out of the 40s, 50s, and into the 60s, 70s. We could produce a lot of aircraft up until about, late 70s time, But as things became more and more advanced and components were diversified around the world, we slowly but surely lost the ability to be able to do such levels of complicated aircraft production. We just don't have that ability. So Russia, who can produce 150 fighters or ground attack aircraft, because those are smaller jets, that we're not talking these massive, like, strategic bombers, even though Russia has a vastly bigger strategic bomber fleet. I mean, we're talking their bomber fleet is like the strategic bombers. If you take everything that they've put in storage and maintain in storage with all their active numbers, they have 571 strategic bombers. They don't have to make any more because they already have more than anybody else. And even though China has the second biggest strategic bomber fleet overall, they can easily increase theirs too. China has basically twice as many as we have. Twice as many as we have. Because we have 156 strategic bombers. China has 242 plus, and the plus number, that 242 is just their H-6Ks. The H-6Ks. The plus number comes from the unspecified number of H-20 stealth bombers that China's been producing now for the past few years. We don't know how many of those they've built, but one can assume it's probably in the dozens by now. It's probably in the dozens. We're talking maybe 2 or 3 dozen, which added to their 242 H-6Ks, puts them at around 300. Around 300. But because we don't know the exact number of H-20s, I just say 242 plus. Whatever that plus actually is. Whatever that entails. So, now back to our aircraft production. We could produce 80. And this is under ideal conditions, mind you, where our supply chain works. We could get the components we need for this, and we could put it all together. We could slap it all together and send it on its way. We could produce 80 on our production lines per year. 80 fighters or their ground attack equivalent. Because they're about the same size, roughly. So we could produce 80 such aircraft a year. 80. Russia's production capacity is 150. It's 150. China's capacity for ground attack and fighter aircraft is 400. So it's 3 times, a little more, but it's 3 times, we'll just say, than what Russia can produce. And Russia outproduces us by almost 2 times. Almost 2 times. Now, because 80 times 2 is 160, Russia produces 150. It is nearly 2 times, but we still can't we can't outproduce either one. Either one. Now, mind you, China produces the most aluminum in the world. Aluminum, which translates to aircraft production. They have the most factories, military industrial plants, than anybody on the face of the earth. China as a nation has 40% of the entire world's industry. All of it. 40% is in China. Yeah. China already outproduces everybody in titanium, aluminum, tungsten, and I've already talked many times about the applications of tungsten in the realm of military applications. Same with titanium. Also aluminum for aircraft and some other parts of other components. You also have them by a huge gulf producing the most steel. It's 1 billion tons, regular tons, imperial tons, over 1 billion imperial tons annually. That's bigger than the next 20 nations combined. So you've got that. You've got them producing 38.5 tons of aluminum. 38.5 million tons. I forgot to say the million. 38.5 million tons of aluminum annually. China. That's the most in the world. They produce the most steel in the world at the over 1 billion tons number I just told you. Produce the most tungsten by a big gulf. 66,000 metric tons, but 66,000 metric tons. The next biggest producer is Vietnam at only 4,500 metric tons. So then you have titanium. They produce over half the world's titanium. 110,000 metric tons of titanium. They produce the most chemicals in the world. The most chemicals. And chemicals have applications from producing munitions to refining metals and, everything else. I mean, to creating fertilizers, to just whatever. Chemicals are in everything. Chemicals are used in everything. And they produce the most chemicals. They have the biggest chemical output in the entire world. So all of these have military applications, okay? And China leads the world in all of them. China has the most military factories on the face of the earth. And I'm talking large scale. Over 500 massive industrial plants, because they built all of these plants to add to what they've already had, hundreds of them to add to what they've already had, which is about a few hundred. They built about 300 to add to what they already had. Well, a little more than that, but I'm just going to round it down to 500. So they have 500 enormous, massive factory complexes that just crank out all kinds of things. You have dozens of factories per each type of product, whether that's an engineering vehicle for combat engineers, or for bridge laying or whatever, a mechanic's vehicle for bulldozing, or like a recovery vehicle to produce them. You have dozens for armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles. You have a dozen or more for tanks. I know they have a dozen for tanks. We have one. They might even have more than a dozen for the tanks, because they have such a massive capacity. When I read up on their tank production capacity, it's enormous. 750 main battle tanks annually, as advanced as the tanks are now today, with all their protective systems on there against guided munitions. And, like the trophy system, China has their own version of the trophy system. Like I told you all on my Chi-Com tank video for their newest battle tanks. They have all this infrared sighting and night vision equipment on it. They have lasers for, guiding their main gun, and they have the ability to stabilize their gun, and just all these different things. Their ballistic computer, their fire control system, all of it. These tanks are vastly more complicated than they were all the way back in the early Cold War or World War II. Tanks have come a long way. Infantry fighting vehicles have come a long way. And China can produce these by the boatload. We have one factory for tanks. And we almost closed it down. Yeah. So there's a lot of myths out there. People think that, America #1, but no, we've gone down. We've gone down in our production capacity, our components. We don't even produce the components ourselves. So we have to get them from a supply chain from foreign sources, which we even source a lot of the electronics out to China, our enemy, giving them a back door into all our most complicated weapons. So, because it's a lowest bidder situation. People don't understand that. A lot of Americans don't understand that. It's a lowest bidder situation. Contrary to popular belief, we do not acquire a lot of our electronic components from Taiwan. We get them from who? Oh, we get them from communist China. Yeah, so there's a lot of myths and fantasy fairy tales out there that people are saying, having to do with our abilities, and thinking that we can never fall behind other countries. We're America. Yeah, bullshit. We already have. And people don't want to accept it, People don't want to believe the truth. So when you tell them the truth, they'll proceed to say that you're not telling the truth without evidence. They have no evidence to prove you wrong, of course, and they never could find any. They'd never be able to find any. Because these are people that are scared of the truth. They're scared of the truth. They're scared to admit that it's true because they don't want to believe it. And when somebody doesn't want to believe something, They will go to great lengths to plug their ears and cover their eyes and pretend that it's not happening when in fact it is. It is. It is happening. People just don't want to accept it. We've been outdone by China and Russia. Russia is after China. They're the second overall in their military production capacity after China. They can produce, on average, when you average everything out, all the types of munitions, all the types of vehicles, they're about 1/3 of the capacity that China is overall. So we are about half of Russia's capacity, half, averaging it all out, of course, aircraft, tanks, and all the other stuff. So yeah, Patty, yeah. Hey, Lady M, great to see you, and Miriam and Jason Mitchell. I'm glad you all came in. Yeah, but these are facts. People don't want to believe. They just don't want to believe it. They're ignorant. They don't know any better. They listen to people that feed them the lines of bullshit and don't tell them the truth. We don't have that Cold War industry. We don't have that World War II industry. No, we've been surpassed by the two main powers, the two number one powers, in real terms, in real facts, figures, capabilities. Just that we've been surpassed, okay? We've been surpassed by Russia, but mainly by China, by a humongous stride, But speaking of Russia, when I was doing my last live, when I had so many things jumbled up in my mind as I was speaking, I made a mistake again. Literally the same thing slipped out of my mouth that had happened the other time I said it, in reference to the pinning attack that Russia did at the very beginning when they went into the proxy to invade it. Yeah, the pinning attack in Kiev. It was not the 106th Guards Air Assault Regiment. I said that again. That was the second time I said that. It was the 104th Guards Air Assault Regiment. Because when I listened to it back, I played it back, I was like, oh, damn, I said that again. So I had to fix that. I typed it out in the, description box for the last video, so people hopefully when they read the description will see that I had to put one correction. I listened and I heard myself say it again. The second time I said it wrong because I meant to say 104th Guards Air Assault Regiment, and it came out all the way wrong. I said 106 Guards Air Assault Regiment. No, the parent unit of it is the 76th Guards Air Assault Division over the 104th Guards Air Assault Regiment. That was the forces, the pinning forces that went in around Kiev and took key nodes in that city. So, yeah, I wanted to correct that while I'm on here now. But yeah, there's a lot of myths and fairy tales going on, and just all kinds of misconceptions and distortions, and people just don't understand it. They don't want to understand it because they don't want to believe it. And now I'm hearing all kinds of things about the selections and all this other stuff. I don't even talk about it because it's all a bunch of BS. Hey, Cats, great to see you, and Patty, and Grandma Deb, and everybody. Great to see everybody. But normally I don't talk about the selections because the selections are just, I mean, we already know that. We already know that whole game. We already know it's a rigged system. You get the same two BS choices every time, never fails. You get garbage 1 or garbage 2, garbage red or garbage blue, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, it's a slave suggestion box. If you participate in that system, then you are consenting to being a slave. You are saying that I fully endorse your system, and I am going to participate and volunteer myself to agree to the terms of my enslavement. Because you're saying that, okay, well, if given these two horrible choices, I have to choose the lesser of two evils. No, choose no evil. Choose no evil. Don't participate at all. Do not participate. Don't do it. Don't do it. Leave it alone. It's their system. It's not your system. It's their system. They're the ones that force you to have to pick between two bunk BS pieces of garbage that are just going to offer you more of the same. They're going to offer you the same things that they've always offered you. Nothing's ever going to change. People think, the definition of insanity is to repeat the same processes over and over and over and over and over and over, expecting a different result every time you do it. So would not then voting be a form of insanity, of psychopathy, to buy into that system? Of course it would. Of course it would. It's garbage. Don't do it. What would be amazing? If everybody just stopped voting, if everybody stopped doing it, they would be saying, okay, we no longer are giving consent to this evil, diabolical, garbage system. We're not playing your game anymore. That would be incredible. That would be beyond amazing, If everybody just said, we're not doing this anymore. Take your vote and shove it up your ass. We're not playing your games anymore. That would be the ultimate vote, because everybody would be saying, we're done with this. We're not doing this no more. We're done. We're not playing these games. We're done with you. That would be amazing. So, yeah, yes, cats, it really is. And Missy Calhoun, yeah, people are so delusional. It's just, voting does nothing, because they're the ones that pick these candidates. People that have more money than you could ever make in your whole life, that you could ever make in 5, 10 lifetimes, they're the ones picking the candidates. They're the ones paying for them, endorsing them, having them go up there to represent these special interests and lobbyists and these uber rich. That's who picks your candidates. You're not picking candidates. They're all bad choices. Every last single solitary one of them. So the best thing you could do is not even participate. Don't do it. Just don't do it. I've never voted in my life, because something told me that this whole thing is a bunch of BS. This whole thing is rigged. This whole system's rigged. Just don't do it. Don't play the game. Don't play the game. If you don't play the game, then your conscience will rest easy, because you didn't participate. You didn't endorse any evil. Not even just the lesser of two evils. You didn't endorse no evil because you took no role in it. You took no role in it. It's garbage. The whole thing is garbage. Yes, Lady M, that's what I'm saying. It's all garbage. It's all rigged. The left-right paradigm is a false, globalist-oriented paradigm. Hey, Brogan, good to see you. But, the left-right paradigm is a false, globalist paradigm. And, you would think by now there would be more than just some two-party system, which is really just one. You would think by now, that after all these many decades, thank you. After all these many decades of just dealing with the same things repeated over and over and over and over and over, you think people would get sick of the same two groups of con artists, these losers, these lowlifes, I'm not even going to say their name, red team and blue team. You think people would get sick of them, and you think there would be whole new, it wouldn't even be parties. You think they would just abolish parties altogether and just vote on people based on their principles. Just their principles alone, not some party or platform. You know, to hell with all that tribalist garbage. You think people would just pick somebody that could do the damn job correctly? No, no. But that would be a truly free country. If you would ever see something like that, if you would see ordinary grassroots people running instead of these, billionaire assholes and these, multi-millionaire assholes, if you just saw everyday run-of-the-mill people running who wanted to really, rise up from the grassroots to change things, if you saw them running, that would be an indication that your system is actually a real system. But no, no. It's always these rich asswipes that get, funding or propped up by uber rich asswipes, and that is the overlord class that they want to put over you and keep over you. They don't ever let ordinary people, God forbid an ordinary person, is able to run in some sort of, selection process for anything higher than a governorship or something, or whatever else. But that's why this country and its entire system is a fake system. The left-right paradigm is no different than WWF wrestling. It's just WWF wrestling. These red team and blue team people get up there, they talk a bunch of garbage, they talk a bunch of trash to each other, and then when they're done with their acting, what they do next is they walk off the stage like WWF, and then they go hang out with each other and have fun together and whatever else they do. It's all corrupt. It's all rotten from its very core. So to participate in it is to endorse it. That's my whole point. If you participate in it, you are endorsing the system that you claim is, not representing you, that's oppressive. Well, you're endorsing it by going out there and voting. You're actually asking, in so doing, you're asking for more of the same. So, hearing about this constantly, I'm just like, stop! Like, when are you people going to understand these very basic concepts? When are people going to understand this? You would think that they would understand by now, I'm not going to talk about that anymore because you all know how I feel about that, about the left-right false globalist, Western globalist paradigms. It infuriates me to truly think about it. It makes me want to, say a lot of crude, crass language about it, but I'm trying to keep it like, PG-13 here, I don't consider the word shit a curse word because it's a synonym of feces and excrement. And any word that appears in the Bible, like damn, hell, ass, they're bastard, those are all words in the Bible, so I don't feel bad about saying them either. I don't want to say the F-bomb or none of that, but, that's one of those things, that just drives me up the wall, drives me out of my mind. The people still haven't understand these very simple concepts just yet. So, back to the war production myths. So, we can produce a batch. I think the last batch we had of tanks that was actually produced was a batch of like some 11 or so that we produced. We have the capacity to produce perhaps about 80 a year, but the last batch I heard of coming from the Lima, Ohio tank plant was about 11 tanks. Russia, of course, can produce 250 annually. I've read everybody these manufacturing statistics before. So they can produce 150 either fighter jets or ground attack jets annually, 150. They can produce 250 main battle tanks. That's the Russians now. The Chinese can produce 400, just a little over 3 times what the Russians can produce, 400 fighter or ground attack aircraft annually. And they have been able to do so now for the past 5 years, since all their enormous factory complexes came online. The tanks, 750 main battle tanks annually. China. Now, if you know about the main battle tank production, then you're aware that the infantry fighting vehicles and armor personnel carrier category, for every main battle tank you can produce, that's 3 either IFVs or APCs you can produce, because they use much less metal than a main battle tank. You know, they have a little bit of armor, but it's nothing like a main battle tank. Now, an infantry fighting vehicle, in terms of like armor protection and gunnery, it's like you start with an APC at the very basic level. Then an IFV is like where you bridge the gap between what an armor personnel carrier and a tank is, like a main battle tank. But even before a main battle tank, you would have a light tank. There's light tanks too. And the Chinese have a massive fleet of light tanks. Now, we used to have the Sheridan, which I even made sure to include in my internal conflict documentary I made, my second American Syrian-style internal conflict. Now, in the last video, in that 5-video series, they had used Sheridan tanks. They brought some of them out of long-term storage and began to bring them back up to code, you know, refurb them, you know, as best as they could, at least. And they salvaged these and brought them a little bit back up to code. And they equipped a brand new unit they created out of Navy sailors with airmen, you know, all the people that they could scrape together for this. And they fought in the battle at Reno. It was, I mean, I had to laugh as I was making that, because I thought of them having to train sailors and airmen as like ground soldiers, you know, and train them how to use these. But we used to have quite a fleet of Sheridan tanks, these light tanks, but we've managed to, you know, put a lot of them into storage. But, you know, they were a pretty cool light tank. I mean, I got to admit, they were pretty cool. I like the Sheridan. I mean, it was a cool light tank. I mean, the Chinese use a lot of light tanks. The Russians have some, but most of theirs have been put into long-term storage. But, you know, the Chinese have this enormous fleet of about 3,800 light tanks. And then their main battle tank fleet is 19,300 main battle tanks, active and storage numbers. So, all in all, China has this enormous tank fleet between light tanks and main battle tanks, whereby they have 23,100 tanks, just light and main battle tanks. So there's nobody that comes even close to that. And all their older tanks are all upgraded. Now, our army has not had any new designs, and I'm talking about the Army, the ground forces. Now, to be fair, the Air Force had the F-22, and they had the now garbage, and this is total garbage, F-35, which is a piece of garbage. It's drastically overrated for what its actual capabilities truly are. Its maneuverability, its you know, structure, how structurally sound it is. It has a lot of accidents. It's been created with being able to do everything. It's supposed to be this multi-role, do-it-all aircraft, but it does nothing well. Nothing. And the canopy design is terrible. You know, there have been a lot of mechanical issues with these aircraft from Jump Street, from the get-go. There's a lot of issues with the F-35. I'll just put it that way. It covers a whole broad spectrum of different things. And we had something much better. We had something much better. Grandma Deb, you know that I know there are Chi-Coms in Canada. There are indeed Chi-Coms in Canada. There are Chinese communist troops inside Canada and Mexico. Because I've seen you before, Grandma Deb. You've been on my channels, haven't you? I think I recognize you. Yeah, there might even be Russians there too, Grandma Deb, now that I'm looking at your comment. Yeah, but there's definitely Chinese base there because the Chinese now have legal bases in Canada. They have legal bases. They march in uniform and everything, like on Salt Spring Island. And they're building naval installations on the western side of Canada. And it stands to reason that they'd be doing the same in places like Quebec and Labrador and, maybe, who knows, Prince Edward Island, maybe, wherever else. They fly regularly. PLAAF aircraft fly regularly over London, Ontario. Means they have a base close by. They're seen regularly flying over London, Ontario. Chi-Coms are all over Canada and Mexico. So, yes, Grandma Deb, they are up there. I know the Chinese, for without a shadow of a doubt, are up there in humongous numbers. But the Russians, they probably are. They probably are too. I just haven't heard as much about them up there as I have about the Chinese. I've seen too much evidence, like smack you in the face type of evidence, that there are massive amounts of Chinese up there. Massive. They're doing that because they're going to invade us, Grandma Deb. The Chinese and Russian coalition that they're putting together is going to invade the United States. You should watch all the videos on my channel, Grandma Deb. I have a lot of great playlists. All my best work is in my playlists, and a little bit of it is in the community tab where I've put the typed out stories that I wrote in my community tab further back. But you should watch my live shows and watch my hypothetical invasion documentaries like 96 Hour Invasion, the Pacific Northwest documentary. There's community tab story review for the stories I typed out in the community tab, which reviews very important parts of those stories. There's also my audiobook. My audiobook is quite a resource and is coming along quite nicely. It's very long, so thus far taking up maybe, I don't know, about maybe a day, like a whole day. It's over 22 hours in length. It's like 22 hours and like 20 minutes, something like that. It's long, and I'm not even done with it yet. By the time it's finally finished, the whole story's finally finished, this is going to be like a 30-something hour long audiobook. So if you've ever gone on a long trip, it takes you about over a day to get there, well, you got a good solid audiobook you can listen to. From the moment you pull out of a driveway till you get where you're going. That thing will last your whole trip, most likely, if you're driving. So, I was going to say, anyhow, that, the Chinese are everywhere. Them and the Russians. They're all over North America. They're going to invade. Hey, Bang Bang, great to see you. Hope you're doing great. London, Ontario. Yeah, there's a lot of Chi-Com aircraft flying over that area. A lot of them. So yeah, they're all over the place. Oh yeah, Grandma Deb, it's a lot of resources. You should use them. Whenever I get off of YouTube, when I'm finally done with my audiobook, there will be a mountain of resources on this channel for people to use as they please. So yeah, there's going to be a whole bunch of things. I mean, even internal conflict stuff, like my 5 live stream video long, because I had to do it as a live stream format to even be able to fit it all into the live. There's a 5 video live of my internal conflict documentary. The first part, well, the first 1.5, is a story format of how it all begins, with the rest of it being broken down into individual large battles, okay, it discusses the small-scale combat, like the low-intensity aspect of the warfare, but where large enough forces were able to concentrate to actually have large-scale battles, where you have like tens of thousands of men fighting one another, that is where I actually made battle maps. And then I even talked about the leadership of the different factions. I talked about their economies. I talked about every conceivable aspect, atrocities, all of it. Every single conceivable aspect of how such a thing would be, I discussed it in very detailed length, which is why it's a 5-video series. Originally intended to be 4, but my phone overheated on part 4, so I had to put it in the freezer and end the stream and recontinue on part 5. So it ended up being 5 instead of 4. So that's, but that in and of itself is pretty long. It would take up the greater part of a day because it is about 12 hours or so. And that's the internal conflict, the civil conflict, Syrian style. And by Syrian style, I mean with factions, like sectarian factions, where you have like different armed groups rising up throughout the land, taking control of different areas and fighting over the control of the country with each other, basically, more or less. That's what it is. So the invasion work, the internal conflict work, all my live shows where I cover facts and figures just on China and everything, Russia, us, all throughout it, that's a mountain of resources. And if you like to read, I typed out audio books in the community tab. It's all there. So if you like that, there's a whole bunch of things for you to look at. I'm going to be basically done on YouTube soon, and I'll leave this up as a floater channel. But there's a lot of myths being perpetuated out there, myths about what we can do, as a country that we really can't do anymore because we've shuttered most of our industry, and most of the old factories we used to have are all dilapidated and caving in, walls collapsing. There's no industrial machinery inside anymore, to make things even happen. I mean, all the neglect that has been happening to our industries, there's no way in hell that we are going to be able to mass produce on the scale that we would need to be able to compete with China, or even Russia for that matter. And Russia's industry is only 1/3 the size of China's. 1/3 overall average. Because China, being the world leader by humongous gulfs in steel, titanium, tungsten, aluminum, there's no competition. The military applications of those metals are immense. Aircraft, ground vehicles, it's immense. I mean, how are we going to compete with somebody like that? How are we going to do it? And they're the #1 chemical producing nation on Earth. Chemicals are used in everything. So how then are we going to compete with the Red Chinese? We're not. So I hope people understand this, because this is very serious, and I don't see how people don't realize these facts yet. How they just simply don't realize these facts. China leads in so many technologies too, so it's not like we got them beat there either. We don't have them beat in either production or technology, as China leads the world, as they lead the world in lasers and directed energy weapons. They have their particle accelerators and the ability to create miniature artificial stars. They also have the lead in robotics, where they're even making androids, because their artificial intelligence matches their robotics production. So think about that. Integrating AI into robotics. You know, they can have, of course, their robots either have human controllers or they have AI. AI. China has the most cameras of any nation on Earth, with their artificial intelligence programs enabling them to spy on everybody. With their, you know, think about how easy that makes the job of their MSS, which is like their secret police slash, you know, CIA type intelligence gathering organization. Their artificial intelligence is immense, like their robotics production. You know, yeah, Russia has robots too, we know that, but the European robots that are being produced now by, you know, robotic nations in Europe that produce robots like France, Germany, Russia, they can't compete with what China, South Korea, and Japan have. We can't either. Our Boston Dynamics robots, those are like the most basic designs of robots that China has. Think about it. So, China also leads in electronic warfare alongside Russia and hypersonics alongside Russia. But here's the kicker. China has taken their hypersonics a step further by having fractional orbital bombardment, whereby they can circumnavigate the Earth, and then the terminal phase, detach a hypersonic glide vehicle that flies in random patterns, boom, you know, hits its target just like that. Cannot be intercepted, because the weaponry we have is neither fast enough, nor is it designed to go after such things. Our lasers that we have, they're only made to intercept subsonic cruise missiles, maybe, or drones. That's the best we can do. The radar fields have limits before, so as this thing is moving through one radar field at an immensely high rate of speed, it's then going to cross over into a whole different one. So the targeting radar for this area, before it can even lock on to something that's moving that fast and maneuvering, it'll be through that radar field and into another one before it finally hits its target. It's too fast and too maneuverable to be intercepted. And even if they could get a lock on that thing, if they had somehow gotten a quantum computer to be linked to a radar, and it would have to be in, coincidentally, the right place at the right time, mind you, if they somehow got a quantum computer and hooked it up to the targeting radar, it's so absurd, but listen, if they got a quantum computer and a targeting radar to somehow like mate into one single entity, and this thing's like bobbing and weaving and zooming through this area, and the quantum computer got a lock on it, you then would have to have the ability to fire something that was fast enough and accurate enough to then intercept that bobbing, weaving, fast, zooming hypersonic glide vehicle. Or a hypersonic missile if it's a plain old regular hypersonic. So, and my alarm going off. Anyway, so think of how absurd that is. So when people say that we have this stuff that we just don't have, and we don't have it, believe that. We do not have this stuff. All our high technology, like I've said in my last live, is buried in the deepest depths under area whatever, you know, I mean, like I said before many times, ascribe a number, you know, like I said, making a joke about it, but, you know, it could be Studio 54 or whatever the hell it is. You know, I mean, we hide all our stuff underground. underground. We don't mass produce it. We don't mass deploy it. We hide everything underground. And there it stays. We don't mass produce, mass deploy, and mass train people on this high technology that we have. We keep it hidden. China doesn't have that problem. Russia really doesn't, but China especially doesn't have that problem because of their AI and camera system and secret police, their MSS, that can spy on everybody with the type of AI they have. So that's to say that, that they don't have that issue. They can deploy their high technology. They can mass produce their high technology. And they damn sure have the resources and industrial capacity to do so. So that's China. That's China. We don't have that. We don't have that. We do not have those abilities. So whenever I see these videos that think that we're all, at the top of the pyramid because they listen to too much mainstream media propaganda, or I should say mainstream media styled propaganda, and underestimating our enemies, they're really missing the facts. They're missing the facts. So when this person who's some armchair, wannabe, cliche, America can't be beat by nobody type of wannabe, all I told him was, I said, wrong, fail. You fail. You don't, because these people don't understand the realities of the resources that China outstrips us in by a humongous gulf. They don't understand the industrial capacity this nation has. 40% of the entire world's industrial base is in China. Military production and civil production, both. They have a real economy while we have this fake funny money economy. They just don't get it. They don't understand it. They don't want to understand it because they want to be comfortably numb in their ignorance. Comfortably numb in their ignorance. They just don't want to believe it. So, you're not going to change a lot of these people. You could throw facts at these people all day long, and they won't listen to your facts. Not one bit. Because bias wins out in most people. Their mind, they're highly biased, and they won't listen to reason or facts. Because they have this tribalist mentality. Tribalism. Where just because you live somewhere, or, you're affiliated with whatever, you have to stick by that. Even if the facts prove it wrong, you have to stick by that just because, for the sake of it. For the sake of it. I used to be biased. Believe it or not, I used to be biased. But I've learned to let that go because my loyalties are to Yeshua Messiah before anything. Everybody's loyalty should be to the Most High, His Son, and the Holy Spirit before anything else. Before anything else. Once you can do that, then the bias will start to melt off of you little by little by little. And you'll start to acknowledge the realities that exist in our world. Whether they favor us or whether they favor somebody else entirely, you'll begin to acknowledge the reality. The reality is we've lost our way. We've lost our way. Not just with our woke military, but with everything. With our industry, with our capacity to crank out high technology items, which we can't do because we depend on foreign components. With our supply chain drastically, being, eviscerated. We've kneecapped ourselves, we've castrated ourselves militarily with our fuel production, with everything. Everything. We've totally done ourselves in. Totally done ourselves in. So I don't know how we're going to, come out of that. But here's Romero, sleeping good. He's a good cat. But anyway, I'm gonna get going, y'all. But there's a lot of biased people out there, and they can't get over their bias. That they just can't. They can't acknowledge facts. They won't acknowledge facts because they don't want to. Because they just can't get over their feelings about whatever. It can be about where we live, or it could be about whatever group they're affiliated with. Like I said earlier about the left-right false paradigm. There's people that just can't let that go. Think about it. Really think about that. It's all because of pride and bias. What does the Bible tell us about pride? You shouldn't be prideful, right? About anything. You shouldn't have pride. Makes sense? Does to me. Well, I enjoyed having everybody. Talk to everybody before I get going here. If I can see the chat. Hey, Nancy and Lady M and Miriam and Daughter of the Most High and Grandma Deb and Bang Bang and Patty and Brogan, Ify, and Klaus. What's going on, Klaus? How you been, man? Good to see you. Good to see you. Missy Calhoun and... All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for showing up. It was wonderful. Wonderful. Y'all have a blessed day. I just had to come on because there's a lot of channels saying a lot of absurd things that have and Cats, good to see you too. Yeah, there's a lot of channels saying a lot of absurdities out there that just have lost their grip on reality because they won't look further into it. They just want to believe, Don't stop believing. That type of nonsense. People don't want to stop believing. They don't want to stop believing in whatever they put their stake into, They just don't want to give it up. But you know what? I had to give up realizing, I had to give up thinking that, we were all that in a bag of chips when we really aren't. We're really not. When I started digging in the facts tell a different story than the bias has told, I had to stop believing. Because it's just not true. It's not true. We're not the number one producing anything nation anymore, really. I mean, we produce wokesters, but you know what I'm saying. We're not number one in military production anymore. We're not number one in civil production anymore with civil industries like, the steel industry or the chemical industry or, the oil industry, whatever it is. We're not number one anymore in really any of that. I mean, we might have assembly plants left where we might assemble things for final assembly, but we don't produce whole entire products like we once did. Very few things see their entire production span through our country. Very few items anymore compared to how it used to be back in the 80s and 90s. Very few items. Things have changed, and people don't like change, and they can't accept change, but it's changed. And it's not changed for the better. So, if you want to believe in facts, then you got to come out of pride and bias first. Like I said, I used to be very biased, I loved the Army. I was all about it. I was all about the Army. I loved it. It was so different back then. It was as close to perfection as you can get for an organization like that. It was really, it was amazing back then. I'm talking 10 years ago and earlier. It was incredible. I loved the Army. I enjoyed it. I was proud of it. I really was. I mean, some of my fondest memories come from my days in the Army. My excluding the bad stuff that happened overseas. The rest of it, man, I find myself nostalgic time to time. But then I have to tell myself, well, Chad, it's not really like that anymore. It's all changed. And God took you out of that at the best possible time. At the best possible time. Because had you stayed, you'd have had to deal with all the petty nonsense that went down during 2020. By then, you'd have been close to retirement. Talking about myself. Regular retirement. I'm retired now, but it's not regular retirement. It's due to my brain injury, my back and neck injury. You've all seen my pictures. I've used some of them as thumbnails of my MRAP with the flames spilling out of it. That was my first time. Second time was at night. And the cameras we had back in 2008, pretty primitive. You couldn't really get good night shots back then. But my injuries, the first time occurred during the day, where we had our little Samud battle, where I got to use my M249 and light some shit up with it. And that's all I'll say. And that was before I got hit. But I have to tell myself, you'd have been close to retirement. What would you have done? Would you have gone AWOL? Would you have taken a bad discharge because you would have refused to take the MOTB? What would you have done, Chad? What would you have done? God got me out of that at the best possible time. As I was getting out, that was when things just were starting to change a little bit. That was when General McChrystal came on there looking like he had a stick up his ass to have to say that policies were changing. Y'all know what policy I'm talking about. The rainbow policy was being implemented. They were getting rid of the don't ask, That was right as I was leaving too, as I was retiring, as I was exiting. And it all went downhill from there in 10 years. Look what we have now. Anyone that thinks that can fight Russia or China, you're smoking rocks. You're smoking rocks. You're out of your damn mind. The old army we had, yeah, they could have contended with Russia. They might have even been able to beat them back then. Now, we've fallen so far behind in everything, and they've come so far ahead in everything, no way in hell we could beat them. No way in hell. They're about to finish off this proxy like a tidal wave coming in with 300,000 troops that they built up. And we really wouldn't be able to take China. China ain't worried about us. They stomp a mud hole in our ass. 40% of the world's industrial base. Against what? Like 5% maybe? Real numbers? Here, 5% against 40%? We don't have a chance in hell. Their human resources are so immense, too. So immense. They're peacetime men under arms. are 15 times bigger than what we have. 15 times. 2.2 million times 15. That's a little over 30. It's not quite 30, but I'm just simplifying the math. I'm rounding. 15 times, because they have their 20 million man paramilitary. As I've explained many times, each and every individual branch and how many people they have in it of their paramilitary, totaling 20 million. 5 million reserves of their regular military, not to be confused with their PLA strategic reserves, which are part of the paramilitary that come under PLA command in a time of war, but in peacetime they're part of the paramilitary. Not their regular military reserves are 5 million. Not their strategic reserves that are in the paramilitary. Their regular military reserves are 5 million. Then you got a 4 million man active duty military, which is like their best forces of all. That's all in all, grand total, 29 million. We're talking nearly 30 million troops under arms in China in peacetime, no less, against our rinky-dink 2.2 million. They're basically 15 times bigger than we are in peacetime. Their new platforms for their army, for their air force, and for their navy are some of the best in the entire world. They are the best. So how are we going to compete with them? Because all their older and upgraded stuff gets passed on down the line to like some of the second and pushed down to third-rate units. So they have older and upgraded stuff that's way more badass than the original iterations of these items, because they've added so many things to it, sort of like we've done with our old platforms over the years. But we haven't had any new army platforms, just Air Force, really. I mean, we've had the F-22 and F-35, which the F-35 I don't even really count because it's a bunch of BS. It's a bunch of flying shit. The F-22 was an amazing aircraft, though. We should have continued production of that. We should have continued producing that. But we stopped. Why? Why? Because our enemies bribed or coerced our leaders to opt for something subpar like the F-35 instead. The 22 is a much better aircraft. So the Army hasn't built any new platforms in 40 years. So our main forces, our main ground forces, our Army, use older and upgraded stuff, while China's third-rate units use older and upgraded stuff. Some of their second-rate units, but mostly their third-rate units. Because as weapons proliferate from the first rate down to the second rate, the older stuff gets pushed further down. So their older and upgraded stuff is still extremely lethal on the modern battlefield. I've explained many times how this is the case. And I've even used specific weapon systems as examples of why that's the case. And what they can do to our old upgraded stuff. Their newer stuff is highly advanced and highly lethal. How are we going to compete with them? Realistically, we can't. We've been outdone in all categories. Capabilities, statistics and figures and numbers. We've been outdone in everything. We've been beaten by the best. Because right now, China's the best. It's no longer us. Russia, too, has outdone us. A lot of people can't come to terms with that because they don't want to believe that. But they've outdone us. We've let ourselves go. We've neglected ourselves. So, that's just the reality of it. People are either going to believe it or they're not. All right, well, I'm going to get going. It's been fun, y'all. Y'all have a blessed day. If anybody new came in here, let's see real quick before I get off. Hey, Mary, great to see you. Tales of the Red Pill, welcome. AK-47. Well, it'll be most likely because of the frugal mindset of our enemies, because they're very frugal, very, I guess you can call it cheap. They don't want to expend anything more than they know they need to. So they're going to let us collapse and fall into an internal conflict first. Then they're going to come in full bore and crush the residue into dust, meaning whatever remains after the internal conflict. So that's the order. That's the best metric I can give of the order these things will happen in. Collapse, internal conflict, then invasion. Yeah, our enemies are very frugal in their mindset. They want to conserve resources, not really waste them willy-nilly. Hey, Bill, great to see you. Bill Romanowski and Nancy. And well, welcome everybody. It was great having everybody. Thank you all for coming. You all have a blessed day.